Good. And how about if we give it another couple of minutes before we get started, just to allow more people to get in on it.
Welcome, everybody. We will get started shortly. Still have a few more people joining from the breakout room, so we're going to go ahead and wait just a few more minutes. It's the Meet the Author session, a very exciting session with some wonderful authors and our sponsor.
So great to see everybody. CPED is one of my absolute favorite meetings, just because there's so many like-minded people and people with diverse views, and we get to learn so much.
Technically, it's one of the best meetings I've seen so far. We've done a lot of virtual conferences in the last year and a half.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure that Jill would like to know that.
I will pass that along to her, absolutely.
She works really hard on these all year long, and not just on this convening, but all year long on the CPED sponsored activities.
I think she's going to need a week of recovery time after this is all said and done.
Sure.
All right, if you guys want to go ahead and get started, I'll continue to watch the waiting room and let others in as they join.
Thank you.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining us for this session. It's devoted to meeting the authors with Myers Education Press. I'm Chris Myers. I'm the publisher at the press. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce two of our very best authors, Deborah Peterson and Susan Carlisle. Let's start by me telling you a little bit about the two of them in case you're not familiar with their work. Deborah Peterson is an associate professor emerita in the Educational Leadership and Policy Department at Portland State University. Her teaching and research focus on anti-racist, culturally responsive school leaders who empower students, faculty, and community through improvement science methodology. Her work has been published in numerous journals, including Educational Leadership, Multicultural Matters, and School Administrator. And she has presented at numerous state, national, and international conferences on leadership for equity and improvement science. Susan Carlisle has over 50 years of experience in K-12 education as a teacher, middle and high school principal, and director of curriculum and instruction for a large suburban school district near Portland, Oregon. As a professor of practice and program lead for the Educational Leadership and Policy Program, she has facilitated the leadership development of over 600 school leaders, received 18 grants for her work, and presented and published in dozens of state, national, and international forums of leadership, including collaborating with change leadership researchers Anthony Brick, Luis Gomez, and Paul LeMahieu, improvement science experts. So, the book that we're discussing today, Improvement Science Promoting Equity in Schools, is being used in schools by principals and teachers, as well as educator preparation programs, to guide equity-focused improvement efforts in schools. In addition, they are the co-authors of the forthcoming book entitled Improvement Science as a Tool for School Enhancement, Solutions for Better Educational Outcomes, which is scheduled for publication in February of 2022. So let's start the discussion with these two fabulous authors.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I want to add, it's been an absolute pleasure to work with Chris. We had a message we wanted to get out to school teachers and school leaders about the power of improvement science to promote equity in schools. And Chris has been an amazing publisher to help us get the word out. So thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you.
And not just us, but we started our work with equity and with improvement science years ago. And Robert Crow and some of the other initial first authors of improvement science texts are our colleagues. And when we started reading their work and contributing chapters to their books, we were encouraged to think about our own work and how we could put together a series of chapters and edit a book on improvement science that would be focused specifically on equity, which is a focus for us, has been a focus for us for a long time.
Right, right. Wonderful.
So we have a chat box if people want to put questions in the chat or just put out questions.
That is true. So Deborah, do you want to start the conversation about the book?
Yeah. So this book, one thing I like about it is how it's organized. We've got chapters that are focusing on if you're a classroom teacher and you're teaching reading, for example, promoting equity through reading achievement of students of color. And we've got examples of how teams of teachers have worked, or in another chapter, we have addressing gaps in reading, and we have university and school district partnerships to impact what's happening in the classrooms. And we also have some chapters on social studies. And this particular chapter, one reason we love that chapter is that the teachers had the standards and they had assignments that were tied to the standards, but students of color were not achieving. And so what they did was they were looking at how could student voice inform what they're doing in their curriculum? How could family voice? And so this chapter went out to the students and families and asked them, what would make a difference? What are your life experiences? And then the teachers went back and revised the lessons to match the standards based on what the students and families wanted. And then we also have a section on writing, math, and science. And then another chapter that we absolutely love is the chapter takes place in Canada. And what they were noticing was that Indigenous students were not attending school, they were not graduating on time, and their participation in school and activities was low. And you know, so many schools blame the students rather than saying, what could we be doing differently? And this chapter is really powerful because the author, Jared Milko, reached out to the students and said, well, what activities do you like to be engaged in? And the students identified things such as building traps, building blinds, animal calling, snowshoeing, trekking. And so then what the teachers did, similar to the chapter on social studies, what the teachers did was they redesigned the lessons based on what the students said they wanted to do that were linked to Indigenous lands-based activities. And the teachers tied it to the standards. So they flipped how they were doing the work, which was listening to student voice, honoring the Indigenous nations and the lands-based activities, and redesigning the work. And the outcome was that attendance went up, participation went up. In this particular area, you cannot go outside to do PE activities if it's colder than minus 25 Celsius, which I think is about 15 Fahrenheit, minus 15 Fahrenheit. And the students were asking to go out even when it was colder than that. They were so engaged. Attendance went up and their school connection went up. And so, you know, these are just, any chapter could be picked up by a teacher or by a team leader or by a principal. And the other thing that I really like about the authors and what they've done is they're sharing where they succeeded, but they're also sharing where they failed. And I think too often in education, we only read the examples of success. And the truth of the matter is that context matters. And nobody is 100% successful 100% of the time and the first time, because the context is going to vary. And so the authors have shared some of the ways where they tried a cycle of improvement. It didn't work. They tried another strategy. And so I appreciate the author's willingness to share that, but also how you can just easily pick this up, and you could start as one. Elena Garcia Velasco, who is Oregon's Teacher of the Year, she said, this is a book for all of us who feel the moral imperative to work for equity in our educational system, and it gives teachers and students hope that change can happen now.
Excellent. Susan, we were talking about how dynamic the authors of the various chapters were. What do you think some of their inspirations were?
It seems to me like the call for papers was a focus on improvement science strategies and the use of the process to make change for those students who are traditionally underserved in our communities. And that was an underlying focus in every single one of those chapters. And that, I think, was appealing to many of the people who were making these, putting these projects together. And the way that we can focus on those culturally and linguistically diverse students in specific content areas. And when Deborah and I looked through all of the chapters that had been submitted to us by the authors, we clustered them into content areas, which was not all that easy, but we came up with, as Deborah was describing, those that were focused on reading, those were focused on social studies, and then never would have thought that there would be one so compelling focused on PE and health. And she was describing how the Indigenous populations in Canada were specifically focused on finding ways that they could get their kids to be healthier children, or more possible, it's more probable that they will participate in other aspects of schooling as well. So I think it's the equity focus that was the compelling piece. And I just want to say also that years ago, when we first learned about improvement science as a change process, we were taken by how the focus is on the people who are closest to the problem being engaged in the solutions of the problem, identifying actually the problem first of all, and then figuring out what as a team, what as a collaborative we can do about it. But improvement science as a set of tools is not necessarily focused on equitable outcomes. You have to make it so. And every single one of these authors took that and changed the ways that they looked at improvement science, just the tools themselves, and made sure that it was equity that they were focusing on, and that the outcomes made a difference for those kids who are often underserved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, and we wrote about this in one of our chapters where we wanted to recognize somebody from the public health realm who taught us about improvement science, Professor Cheryl Gelman. What we wrote was, through Professor Cheryl Gelman's guidance, we found in improvement science affirmation for Freire's concepts when he declared that freedom is obtained through contextualized, action-oriented and collaborative actions that, and this is something that's really important for us, actions that enhance the humanity of the individual and the community. And too often in education, I think we, and I as a principal, also engaged in change efforts where I worked with teachers and experts to improve the schools. And it wasn't always the case that I involved the voice of students and families. And that's a mistake, because our schools are here to serve our communities. And as a white middle-class native English speaking woman, first in my family to graduate college, that is the perspective that I bring to everything. My work is better when we include the voices of those whom we are serving together. And Freire gives us ideas for how to do that. And we also really believe in the ideas of, Dewey, who says, as Susan said, those who are closest to the problem or to the learning need to be a part of the solution in making sense of what needs to help happen. And one thing we learned when we've been teaching this method is we even had kindergartners who have been engaged in improvement efforts to reduce theft in the classroom or to increase kindness. And the kindergartners collect the data and keep track of the data to see how they can improve. So it's not something that you need a college degree or any kind of expertise. We each can engage in improvement efforts in our schools.
And we started with this with this series of books by focusing on the people who were teacher leaders, practitioners, who would identify things among them as they talked to each other in the hallway or in the staff room. And that was where we wanted our focus on this first book to be.
Right.
And then as we got more and more people sending us examples of their own improvement science projects for equity, we realized that that was one focus, and there were others as well, people who had a more systemic approach to improvement science, and it was big. Their projects were bigger than what an individual class or a set of kindergartners might achieve, and so there's room for that too. And that's in improvement science, it's called scaling up. You figure out what works in a certain small community, and then you figure out how that could look if you enlarged it and others in your network became knowledgeable and could see ways that what you did might fit to their site as well, and ways that it would not fit, because we're always looking at variations in context.
Right. And that idea of individualized solutions, in a sense, is almost the opposite to where the school environment has been for many years now. There have been an enormous number of critiques of standardized testing, but one of the most common critiques is that it's a one-size-fits-all solution. And one school district that's better resourced is going to do better in standardized testing than one that's less resourced. And here, this methodology allows for, the boots on the ground to be the people who are not only analyzing the problem, but also implementing solutions that come from that. And that's perhaps one of the greatest beauties of improvement science, is that it is measurable. It does give satisfaction to people who want to be able to say, cause and effect, but it's not global. It's much more on a local scale, even though, as you say, it can scale up as well.
Mm-hmm. And it's much more complex than a test score improvement, because while and so improvement science also it asks, let's look at all of the potential impacts of our change. So while our test scores may be going up using these improvement strategies, is something happening to the emotional health of our students. And so we can measure emotional health improving, and our attendance and our graduation rates, so that we're looking at the full complexity of the experience of students, and particularly, with what we have been going through as a nation with our public health situation, we want to make sure students are learning and that they're achieving and they're doing well and that they are healthy. And improvement science, asks us, gives us the tools to ask the questions in a particular context. We were sharing the example of one of our local superintendents who was doing 24-hour improvement cycles. So rather than one full year cycles. And a lot of our school districts are taking data from, standardized data from 1 year, and then they develop an improvement that they'll implement in a year. Well, you can, using the concepts and the examples of the people who are in this book, you can develop an improvement cycle and be collecting data this week.
Right.
This week.
And
which
one
is
of-
really hopeful and inspiring, right? It
And
gives
one of the
hope to
beauties
people.
is that it's immediate. I mean, a team of people can identify something that is influencing negatively their work today and figure out, what am I going to do about that tomorrow? What small change could we make, knowing that this is important to us, and using the tools, gathering the data, implementing the change, and then analyzing the progress, and then seeing where we want to move from there. If we're going to repeat that, or we're going to abandon that, or we're going to modify that.
Right. Right.
And another thing that struck me about that many of the chapters is that they were doing these improvement projects in their content areas during the pandemic. So it didn't happen 2 years ago. I mean, it happened just recently. And the difference they were able to make in a time of COVID, when the resources were majorly changed. I mean, they weren't gone. We just had to access them in different ways. But improvement science provides for that kind of dynamic intervention by a team of people. Nobody does it alone, but it's the way people work together and with a common understanding and a common set of tools that we know work.
Right.
The other thing I think it does is it really enhances teacher voice and teacher engagement, because they're a part of the solution. So rather than the administrator saying, you need to do this, it's the teachers who are
Right.
empowered, which it contributes to strong morale, and it really honors the voice of teachers.
Well, I think that teachers get a bad rap as professionals who are resistant to change. And yet a lot of the change has been exactly what you're describing, these handed down, quote unquote, solutions.
Mhm.
And, standardized testing is just exhibit A of that.
Right.
And yet these are people who, I work with hundreds and hundreds of college of education professionals and with K-12 teachers. And these are people who were desperate to have something that could help their situation. And I think that improvement science does exactly that, because it does empower them. It does allow them to find solutions on their own, rather than having an administrator say, this is the next thing that's going to work in the classroom.
Yeah. And Chris, I think you're right, because, too often in education, there's been a solution that worked someplace. And then we say, oh, let's apply that everywhere. And when it doesn't work in a particular context, we have blamed the teachers. That's not right.
Right.
The context is different. And so when a solution, rather than saying, oh, you didn't implement it, or you were lazy, or you're resistant, no, that's not the case. The context is different. And every single classroom in every district in this nation has a different context, because of children who are different, the teacher's expertise, or the complexity of the situation. So let's honor the person who's closest to teaching the group of students. Let's enhance the humanity of the student and the teachers. And let's collect the data. Let's see in that particular context. And in some of our chapters, you'll notice that we had grade level teams that they all decided they're going to try a particular strategy. What they noticed was that the strategy worked in some of the classrooms, but not in others. So they needed to adjust and adopt what they were doing in the classrooms where it was not working, rather than try harder, rather than seeing, did you not implement correctly? Did you not,
Right.
rather saying what's different in this context? And then let's keep measuring it till we get the outcomes.
Right.
And,
And yet the critique of public education often goes in the opposite direction, where we're looking at national standards, or even how the US compares in PISA scores. And we're being compared to South Korea or Norway, places that have entirely different
Right.
public school systems and standards.
and
Where this is taking it in the opposite direction to say, let's bring it down to even a classroom level or an individual student level.
Mhm. And I believe that that's one of the strengths of the American educational system, is that we believe in educating every child in all of their manifestations of diversity, including their ability levels, and making sure that each child thrives and performs in society in a way that matches and exceeds the expectations of their family members and their own. And other nations have systems where already when the child is 10 years old, it is determined what their educational trajectory will be based on standardized tests. And we don't do that in this nation. And, it's something that improvement science, it gives us the tools to say, in this context, with the special abilities and gifts and talents and desires and dreams of this very precious child who has been entrusted to us in public education, how do we make sure that what we're doing in our classrooms every day honors, elevates, and enhances who they are, so that they can excel beyond their family's wildest dreams? And not every nation has that foundational belief, but our teachers in this nation, that's what we do every day. Teachers wake up excited to go in and to teach their children in their classroom and to make the most of every day. And those who say that teachers are resistant to change, or they don't care, or they're doing it for the summers up, that's not who our teachers are. And improvement science is a way to make sure that those who have had too many things told, top-down strategies that work someplace, it's a way to say, let's try it a different way. And if our data shows that it's successful, let's keep going in that direction. If the data that, whether it's standardized data or locally collected data, whether it's the achievement data and also, other data such as, self-harm data or suicide or bullying or, engaging in risky behaviors, whether that's decreasing, let's collect multiple measures. And then let's look at, after you graduate from high school, what are the success measures? Are you engaged in employment, in education? Those are all of the data points that we need to collect in order to determine whether what we're doing in our public school system is successful.
Right. Good point. Susan, what we're finding so far with your book from the sales side, if you will, I don't mean to sound too mercenary here, but it does occasionally come down to sales, believe it or not. We are seeing a few different audiences really embracing this book. It's being used in a lot of professional development programs. It's being used in public school districts, K-12, and then colleges of education are using it as a tool for training pre-service teachers. And that last category is really important because, we're training for the future here. And what has your experience been in talking to teachers? I'm sorry, phone call, ignoring. What has your experience been in talking to pre-service teachers about what they can do with this in the classroom, in their future classrooms?
Well, I haven't had an opportunity to talk to pre-service teachers. And I think that is an audience that is just an amazing opportunity for us. But I have had an opportunity to talk to teachers who are currently practicing and who are in our administrative licensure program, who are looking to become leaders in their schools and to be in a position in the future where they will be providing professional development and guiding improvement in their school and in their district. Mm-hmm. And when we're I'm going to tell you an N of one, I was meeting with the instructors who are all adjuncts and who are currently practicing administrators. And we were thinking about, well, what are the textbooks, given our focus on improvement science and our focus on equity, that we want to provide, we want to ask students, our practicing teachers, to buy so that they are they have resources to use throughout their cohort program. And being the author of the book, I mean, I really couldn't, all I could do was say, hey, this is a book that Deborah and I have written. This is the title. This is what's in it. This is why I think it's important. And then step back and I sent them the galley proof early on and said, you don't have to necessarily buy it right now, but take a look and then let me know what you think. And those 6 people, those practicing administrators, took a look at the book and came back at the next meeting and said, yes, this is the book that we think we want to have our students read, so that, and that is a book that we then adopted for our program. So I know it resonates with people who
Right.
are currently working in the field. And I'm not surprised. It certainly resonates with me. Every time I read those chapters and I'm re-engaged with the work that these editors did in their schools and districts, I'm amazed at the breadth and the depth and the understanding they have of how change works in school systems.
Right, right. Now, how would you tie the themes and mission statement of this book to your next book? And again, I'll just mention the book that we'll be publishing in February is called Improvement Science as a Tool for School Enhancement, Solutions for Better Educational Outcomes. So how do you link the 2 books together?
That's a great question. So this first book is focused, as Susan said, on classroom changes. So as a classroom teacher, how can you use improvement science to work on reading? The second book that you just mentioned, the one coming out in February, is looking at larger systems. So grade level teams or the entire school. So taking an improvement science effort and scaling it up to the whole school or the entire district. The second book is also all of the chapters, every single chapter is focused on equity and improving the outcomes for historically underserved students. And so I think they'll work really well together. The first one, classroom teachers, so grade level teachers, team leaders, principals, and the one that's coming out in February. So if you're a department chair or a principal, teacher leader, superintendent, how do you change the entire system? But again, it's not the superintendent or the principal or the department chair telling others, this is what you'll do, how you'll do it, when you'll do it, and the method. Rather, it's pulling together a team of people, including students and families, and going through the improvement science process together to impact the system.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the second book will also resonate with people who are working in classrooms, because many of those chapters are focused on social emotional learning and restorative justice and discipline issues that arise and what one can do about them as a collective. So it could be that you and the teacher next door, for example, would be thinking about, well, we share the same students. How is it that the work that is described in these chapters can influence what we might be able to do? So it can be still a very local classroom project or interest, but it can also influence work that a team of people in a school would do, or a whole department, for example, or maybe the whole school. Once you find out what works, and you start to scale up the effort.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's not simply for people who are leaders in the sense across the school, but it could be for people who are currently engaged in teaching a group of children as they move through their day.
Yeah, and I think also that the book coming out in February has examples of short PDSA cycles, 24-hour cycles, as well as longer cycles. And as Susan said, teachers can't wait a year for an improvement to happen. And so I think there will be some examples for classroom teachers of, okay, what can I change today? What data can I collect? So tomorrow we can try something else and see if that makes a difference. And as Susan said, there is a focus on social emotional learning, because there does seem to be recognition that that academics and social emotional learning need to be attended to in our students, particularly given our current context.
Right, right. So when we're talking about public schools, we're talking about a very, very broad spectrum of political thought and educational preferences. Your book, your first book here, the one that we're discussing today, is, centers on equity, but equity can be defined in a lot of different ways depending on regions of the country.
Yeah.
How do you, on a practical scale, how do you address that issue?
Susan and I both believe in the work from Dr. Geneva Gay, who talks about making sure that the humanity of every single child is enhanced. And when families send their children to school, it's a precious child, and they want best for their child. And so whether the child is neurologically diverse, whether the child is tall or short, and Dr. Gay talks to us about this, that manifestations of diversity are about more than your gender. It is about your gender, your race, how tall, short, large, thin, the way that you appear, your dialect, your grammar, your physical, your teeth. And she says all of those and the intersectionality of everything that makes you who you are, your gifts, your challenges, your hopes, your dreams, that's what we want every teacher and every principal to enhance. And that's what families want when they send their child to school. They want their child to succeed. And we in public education, we want every child in our community to succeed. We're a stronger nation when every child thrives. We're a stronger community.
Right.
And whatever your definition is, and whatever your theory is, and I know there's a lot of conversation right now about different theories, when it comes down to it, a family is sending a precious child to school and they want that child to thrive. And improvement science gives us the tools to make sure that every child is thriving.
Right. Right. So you devoted a significant portion of the book to writing and the writing process. What was that about?
So the writing process for the editors or our own writing process?
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking about the content of the book and how, how you had chapters devoted to writing.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, you'll notice that the first chapter is about reading. And then the next content area is about writing. And we decided that those two were synergistic. You can't really separate, because a person who can read then translates that learning by sharing it with others, and that's how you learn to write. So those two, we believe, are synergistic, and we put those in the front of our book because we believe that literacy is a civil right. Literacy, if you don't learn to read, you potentially have a diminished future, and we want to make sure that all of the kids at a very early age have the skills they need to be successful in literacy.
And the chapters on writing focus on students with disabilities, gender equity. One chapter is about when you're doing writer's workshop. It's about being able to focus on the writing and disruptions, so disruptive behavior during writer's workshop. But absolutely, literacy is the foundation of success, and we can look at third grade reading scores and predict the prison population. And so that's why we highlighted it front and center in the first book.
Right. So that could be an ambitious goal, to use improvement science to help to solve the school to prison pipeline. issue, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. It, you know, the stories of, I mean, we've got stories of success in ways that some improvement cycles didn't work, but every chapter is filled with hope, of things that teachers and school leaders and families can do right now to improve the outcomes tomorrow for the children. And, you know, I know that sometimes when you look at the data and, you know, the data from the last year is coming out and people are, oh dear, how are we going to catch up? We're going to catch up by classroom by classroom, family by family, student by student. And these are the methods that can give concrete tools and processes and ideas for teachers right now and for principals right now, so that students have the experience that their families want for them in every part of this country.
Right.
And I think it's important to note that some of these chapters were written by university professors in collaboration with teachers in local school districts. And some of them were written by practicing teachers in collaboration with other practicing teachers. And some of them were actually written by the students who are in our principal licensure program right now. And those are the ones that you know, of which, you know, I have a particular interest, because they are people who are in our community, who are making a difference in every one of those content areas right now. And not only are they making a difference, but the teachers with whom they collaborate now also have a set of skills, and they reach out to the people with whom they work. And it's a snowballing kind of effective change process that people in a whole school are learning to do. And if you want to make change in literacy or in any skill that you're trying to teach children, you need a whole group of people in the community, the children themselves, your fellow teachers, your administrators, and your district office leaders, who are all knowledgeable about how it's done.
Right.
It's not done by, well, in my opinion, it's not done by someone at the district office deciding how we're going to launch the newest thing. It's by the people who are closest to the kids, and the kids themselves deciding what's really important, what they need to know, and how they need to know it, how they're going to learn it. And then the people who are closest to that helping make that happen.
Right. Good point. So we know that improvement science originated in engineering and in healthcare and has migrated into education. But sorry, phone call again.
You're a popular guy.
So the acceptance among teachers and administrators, do you think that it's difficult to achieve buy-in from them when this is a methodology that has come from certainly not similar environments? Healthcare is certainly a very different environment than a school setting.
You know, it's a good point, but the ways that we're similar in healthcare, they're trying to save people's lives. And so they're trying to figure out, what did we do during this surgery that contributed to these outcomes that were not successful for this patient? And they collect measurements and they collect data and they do rounds, they do improvement cycles. If you're in the hospital, you see the rounds happening every morning, where a team of professionals comes around. And so even though it's a different profession, we have the same goals. We in education are trying to save lives through education. And the way that we do it is by collecting data, by involving those who are closest to the problem or to the issue. In the case of medicine, it's the patient, their family members, the doctors, the nurses, the social workers, the pharmacists. In the case of education, it's the student, the family, the teachers, the administrator, and community members. So we collect data, we pull our best thinking, we try something, collect the data. So even though it's different professions, and we're not looking at health outcomes, we're looking at educational outcomes, the commonality is let's involve people who are closest to the issue in the solution, and let's save people's lives through education.
And it seems to me that after a group of people who are new to improvement science are introduced to it and asked to read about improvement science in education, and then we ask them to also read about how improvement science originated, not in education, but in healthcare, and in how it's used in business. And we expand their perception of how improvement science is used across the world, really. Their engagement deepens. I mean, it is as if we're opening up what we as educators do and looking at it through the lens of people who are engaged in other parts of our community, and I think people are that's very pleasing to them, and it gives a sense of accomplishment and a maturity to the ideas that they have about the work that they do.
Mm-hmm. Good. So for a K through 12 teacher, for example, or a school principal who is not yet familiar with improvement science as a tool, what's the starting point in talking to a person like that? Because I can imagine that, I know there's a great deal of skepticism about what's the next best thing that's going to make our students perfect and get us where we need to be. And most of these things don't work out. So what's the starting point of a conversation with them?
Well, I know for me that where I started, and Susan, maybe you started in a different place, but I give the example of when I was learning about improvement science, I did a personal improvement project. And my goal was to walk after dinner. And so and I just tell people, so, one day what I tried was, I thought my shoes aren't right. So I bought new shoes and I collected the data for a couple of days. That wasn't working. I thought, well, maybe it's my rain pants because it rains in Oregon. I don't have the right pants. Maybe that's why I'm not walking. And so I tried all these different strategies. And after I spent a ton of money on new shoes, new socks, new rain pants, new rain jacket, I still wasn't walking. And it turns out the problem was the dishes. After dinner, the dishes in the sink kept me from walking. The solution was not all of that money for all of those other things. It was to say to my family, hey, why don't we do the dishes real fast before we walk? That is what changed my outcome. Now, I'm not saying that that's the solution for everybody who wants to walk after dinner, but in my context, in my family, that was the solution. And that's what improvement science does, is it gives the person closest to the problem or the issue, me, who wanted to walk after dinner, that was the goal for health reasons, to figure out, well, what's keeping me from doing that? But the next person over, it might not be the dishes, it might be something else. And so that's how I start the conversation, is that's the basic concept of improvement science.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really how we teach improvement science. We currently have a group of 100 students who are going through our principal licensure cohort program, and they are all going to be involved in improvement science for the next 9 months. And so we begin by having them read some books and some introductory chapters, and then they all do an improvement science project that's a personal project that's similar to what Deborah was describing. However, what I think your question also relates to is, how do those same students who know a little bit about improvement science themselves go back to their schools and then engage people, teachers, their colleagues who don't know anything about improvement in their improvement science project, which we ask them to do. And so what we have them talk about in small groups is how you can do that. And what it usually comes to is that they get a group of people who will be willing to work with them on something that's really important to all of them. And they start using the tools. They start doing an equity audit, for example, which is one of the first things that we ask people to do, and look at the data from their school about the achievement of their students, particularly related to something that they are most engaged in, a problem that is emerging for them as a collective. And then they do a fishbone, and then they do a root cause analysis, and then they do they make aim statements, and they start thinking about change ideas. So you have people doing it. And often they're doing it without a clear understanding of the whole picture, but they can see that these tools are making a difference in what
Mhm.
happens to them and their kids every day. And then
Right.
they start thinking, well, maybe I ought to read a little more about this. And so then they'll read something. But it's get them doing it, because it sells itself.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right.
And then, understanding the theory of group dynamics, when you're introducing a new idea, there are always going to be skeptics. How do you overcome that skepticism?
Mm,
You start with the willing.
yeah. Well, and I think the other thing is that, as Susan said, you ask people, what do you want to work on? So historically, the superintendent or principal has told teachers what they're going to work on.
Mhm.
But if you ask the teachers and the students and the families, people always want to be engaged when it's something that's important to them. So let's take the time to find out what's important. And then let's go with that. Let's go with what they're identifying, because it might be that it's the reading scores that we really need to work on, but maybe what the teachers are concerned about right now is you can't get the classroom focused enough to learn the specific reading strategies. So maybe that's where you start as a way to get to the reading outcomes that the principal or the superintendent is interested in. Or maybe what the issue is that the books that and in some of our chapters they talk about this, that the books that the teachers were choosing were not interesting at all. And in one chapter for the boys who were in the classroom.
Right.
And so that they ask those questions. Why do you not like coming to reading? Why are you acting, and they were like, we don't want to read these books. So the teachers adjusted what they were doing. So I think, like people are unwilling and reluctant when it's something that either doesn't make sense or doesn't make sense in the context, or feels like one more thing. This isn't one more thing. It's the only thing. Is we want to do our best. We want to do better. Here's just a tool to use and methods to do it.
And it's also a sense of efficacy when they feel like they're in a position where they have control over identifying what they're going to work on and how they're going to carry it out. And improvement science, from our perspective, has been a matter of critical mass. I mean, who in the leadership understands about this change process? I mean, if there's a principal who is kind of tightly holding the strings and won't allow a lot of autonomy, that's a different issue than if you have a principal who understands improvement science, really allows that kind of work in their school, so that people who are in classrooms can make changes and can identify what's important to them and then make some change, identify the change process that they're going to put into place. And after a while, enough people agree that this is important and they can move ahead as an organization. But there is a critical mass. When we first started, before we wrote this book, there were a lot of there was some pushback at the district level or at the central office level in schools about how we were going to do this, and we're going to let teachers do what. And now we're finding that's less, that more people are understanding the value of this process.
And the reason is the principals and the superintendents are getting the outcomes. That's how they are measured. And when they get the outcomes, they're on board. They are on board.
Right. Yeah, and there are so many factors that come into play when you're trying to do something like this. There are also competing methodologies that some school districts consider to be more important or more practical than improvement science. So, there's a certain sell involved with the idea too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the thing that's awesome about improvement science You don't have to put aside $1 million out of your district budget. You don't have to bring in high-paid consultants. You don't need a 5-year plan to implement it. This is something that teachers and principals and superintendents can pick up, departments can pick up, and they can start, as Susan said, you start learning by doing, and you
Yep.
can do it immediately. And so fiscally, it's a very responsible improvement method. But also just in terms of energy, we only have so much bandwidth for new initiatives. As a school leader, I was in one school where I had 17 initiatives, and we had a lot of money from private foundations to do those initiatives. We didn't have enough bandwidth to do 17 well. If we'd had one initiative, which was improvement and using improvement science, so, improvement science to improve our discipline, to improve our reading outcomes, our graduation, right? We would have done better
Yep.
than with 17 different initiatives with 17 different methodologies.
Better focus, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we only have a couple of minutes left. Maybe each of you would like to just have some concluding statement about the books and about what you hope that they accomplish.
I just say simply, I hope that the books are a resource for people who are either just beginning to learn about improvement science or people who are experienced users, to get a sense of how others have used the tools and have made a difference in each one of those content areas, and how they have learned and changed their processes and included way more colleagues and constituents in the problem solving than they did to start with. And they make a real difference for those kids that are the very hardest to reach in our schools.
Great. Deborah?
Absolutely. The biggest hope is that teachers and principals and PTA presidents and community members can pick up these concepts, pick up the book, get an idea, and we'll know that we've made a difference when our teachers are feeling motivated, excited, and when our students, particularly our communities of color and our recent immigrants, women, any group in any society, the non-football player families, whatever it is that our children experience in schools, what we want for each one of our children, what I want for my family members, that they go to school, their voices are heard, their desires and wishes are attended to, and they have a really amazing experience in education in their local school.
Yeah.
Improvement science, and
Fabulous.
these books give a way to get there.
Great. Thank you to both of you. I would very much like to thank CPED for inviting us to sponsor this convening. I think that looking through the program and having dropped into some sessions, that it's a great meeting. I'd like to thank Amanda Parks for this session, and in particularly, I thank Jill Perry, who, by the way, is another one of our fabulous authors. But I really want to thank Jill for having all the allowance of having us participate with this, because it's a great meeting, and we very much enjoy working with you guys. So again, the book is Improvement Science, Promoting Equity in Schools. And I want to thank Susan and Deborah for a great job with this.
And thank you, Chris. You are an amazing publisher. To work with you has been really the joy of a lifetime. Thank you.
Well, other than a poor judge of character, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Amanda, I think